Hi, I'm Emma Clarke, and this is Before the Bar Opens, the podcast about what happens before the music starts. I talk to people who make, use, and love music. Anna Appleby is a classical composer. She trained at the Royal Northern College of Music, and she composes works for the concert hall, for choreography, for opera and choirs. With an emphasis on collaboration, she often writes music specific to her performer and swings through a variety of musical styles. Her music often wrestles with socio-political and spiritual themes. She has a particular interest in writing for the stage and has drawn inspiration from choreographers in the way she works, particularly during her past residency as music fellow with Rambert. She's currently in residence with Glyndebourne and is composing an opera in collaboration with poet Niall Campbell for broadcast studio performance by the BBC Philharmonic. I want to learn more about Anna's rich creative life. So how did music start for you, Anna?
Wow, that's an amazing question. My mum said that she played Mozart to me in the womb, but not deliberately. She used to play Mozart all the time on the piano, and I happened to be there at the time. So I guess it's been there since day zero. I started playing the piano when I was 5, actually for a very silly reason, which was that I was jealous of my sister because she was brilliant at the piano and I just copied everything my big sister did. So I started playing the piano.
It can be a strong motivator, I'd imagine.
It can, I used to copy my brother as well, but he didn't play any instruments. So I think I just used to copy everything they did. And Mum said, of course you can play the piano as well, but I think we'll have to wait a bit for you to do any exams or anything. And I was like, no, I want to do exactly what Ruth's doing. And I literally went straight into doing piano exams at a really young age, which is probably a bit crazy because, having assessment when you're that small is I don't know if I'd recommend it for everyone, but that was my beginning of music, was competition and piano and all that kind of world. And now it's metamorphosed into something quite different, I'd say.
Are you a naturally competitive person?
I'd say actually not. I think there's something about when you're with your siblings that you do when you're the baby, because I was the little one. But actually now I'm not really competitive at all. I hate competitions. I like to just get to know all my colleagues in the industry, and I like them all to do well as well. I like everybody to succeed, as cheesy as that sounds.
No, I get it totally.
I actually sometimes think it's an antithesis to the arts to have competition.
Yes.
Because creativity needs a safe place to grow. I think competition can be helpful for a lot of things, but I'm really enjoying getting to know music in a whole different way now as an adult.
When did you realise that music was going to be such a big force in your life? Was there a moment where you thought, yeah, this is home?
Yeah, it was when I was a teenager. I think teenagers often have these moments of epiphany. But I found it really difficult to concentrate at school. I found it difficult to focus and find one thing that I was really passionate about. I tend to be a bit of an all-rounder and just do a bit of everything. I used to sit in all my lessons and just doodle constantly. And I was very lucky that most of my teachers let me do that because it was the only way I could focus. But in my music and art lessons, I could always focus and I could always be completely 100% in the room. So that, looking back, was a sign. But at the time, I don't think I thought of it that way. And then I joined a youth orchestra when I was about 14 or 15. And I felt massive imposter syndrome because I'd grown up listening to my parents' Ceilidh band practicing and used to fall asleep to the sound of their folk music, which often, to be fair, sounded better filtered through the floor, as they would admit, because they didn't tend to practice a lot and they're quite rough and ready musicians with it.
Authentic.
Yeah, exactly. They used to sing to me as well. Folk music was a huge part of my life. Jazz as well. My granddad loved jazz, so that kind of passed through the family. And I used to also obsessively play my dad's Simon and Garfunkel record on the record player. I loved using the record player. So I had this kind of weird mishmash way into music, which I think is the best way because it gives you this...
it's eclectic, I guess.
Exactly. Like music, you can't really define it in one genre, it's everything. So when I started at this orchestra, which was all these really quite highly trained classical musicians in their teens as well, but they'd been going to things like weekend schools and stuff like that, I felt this huge imposter syndrome. I was like, I'm not a classical musician, I don't belong here. And then
I was going to ask you that. Did you perceive yourself as a classical musician from the get-go?
Yeah,
Or was it a
really.
thing that sort of evolved?
I really didn't. I think I've always seen myself as someone who just makes things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always used to just love making things. Even if they were terrible, I'd just sit and make presents for my friends for their birthdays. I just loved creating something, and that's stuck today. So I didn't really see myself as a classical musician. I just saw myself as someone who was creative and loved making stuff. But you asked me about this like moment of epiphany, and I guess it was when
Yeah.
I'd been in that orchestra for a couple of years, the imposter syndrome started to go. And I realized that these people I was spending all this time with were actually planning to make a living and a job out of music. And I just hadn't imagined that before. I hadn't imagined that was possible. I'd been at school thinking, well, I like all these subjects, but I can't imagine having a job in anything. I found it really difficult to do exams because, I mean, I was actually quite good at exams. I was really lucky, but I found it difficult to think about staying in school and going to university and doing all those milestones and not really knowing what for.
Yeah.
Again, I was lucky because I was actually good at the exams. I was good at jumping through the hoops, probably because of that competitive start early in life.
Was your sister good at exams?
Yeah, she was as well.
Thought you might say that.
I know. It's just, they're such a funny thing, exams, because some people just aren't, But I was fortunate that I managed to jump through those hoops. But really, it was in that orchestra when I realised that these people could actually do this thing 24/7 and then make it into a job. I was like, maybe I could do that too. So I guess that was my epiphany.
So seeing that possibility as something that was attainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had no idea before. It was like this inaccessible world. I had absolutely no idea how anybody could get there or do it, really.
Talking to Anna, I realised her childhood home must have been full of music. I wonder what it sounded like. People listening to music, people practising, people making their own music. It sounds like a vibrant, creative place to grow up. I asked Anna about the themes she likes to work with in her music. You write about socio-political and spiritual themes. What issues particularly move you?
Wow, yeah. So I say that about my music because I like to have a reason behind things that I compose.
Yeah, I get that totally. I'm the same. Otherwise, I'm all over the shop.
I know, right? You need to have something to like root you to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to have a meaning. I think the music has to come first, and I have to focus on the music being good. But I came into composing from like quite a spiritual end. I almost had like this calling to be a composer. I was quite religious as a kid. I'm not religious at all now. I'd say I'm still very spiritual, but I suppose when you brought up religious, the spiritual is always a part of your life.
Yeah.
And that was something that made me feel like I had this calling towards writing music. And music was the only thing I really connected to in church. I didn't connect to church at all, and I still don't, and I don't go to church. I'm not religious, but the music in church was the thing that kind of took me somewhere else. And that foundation, that still continues. Like, I think music is a deeply spiritual thing, and I think that it connects people. I think it's about connection, and it's a different language that...
Yes. A non-verbal language that's universal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, music is particular to different cultures, and
Yes.
it speaks in different ways, but it just says so many things that words can't. And I just love that transcendent aspect of it, really.
So it kind of felt like a vocation for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was almost like I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not do music. It was almost like the decision was made for me by powers that be. I don't know. I don't fully understand it. And I think sometimes that's all right in
I don't
life.
think you have to, really. I mean, it just is, isn't it? This is the thing that I keep thinking about music. It just is. And it's just there.
Absolutely. How about you? Do you have a calling to music as well, do you think? Is it?
Do you know what? I think I do. For me, I think in this pandemic, because I really started composing during lockdown, and I sort of toyed with it a bit before that, but it was pretty much a year ago that I started composing.
Oh, wow.
And I just had this really strong belief that I needed to take refuge in art. And the world is such a challenging, difficult place at the moment. I just needed to try and make something beautiful and to sort of connect with my higher self, really.
Yeah.
And to connect with other people and just to sort of reflect the forces I could feel at work in the zeitgeist, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I think art is that way of communicating the now.
Yeah.
In a way that goes beyond distraction.
Yes.
I think, our culture is just full of distraction.
It's all about distraction.
Yeah.
Eat this, buy this, watch this, click this.
It's really difficult actually at the moment with everything being digital because we've been separated from each other for this whole time. Something I've felt is that art and music are there to kind of ground us and connect us, to take us out of this culture of distraction and focus our minds. And in the digital world, so much more is possible, and it's fantastic. And I work a lot with digital technology, and I know you do as well as part of your work. And so it's a fantastic resource. But something I've found is that because of us kind of being separated from other people, there's been this fragmentation and disintegration where art's been kind of consigned to being content.
Yes.
Which is a very different state of being. Content creators are very talented and it's a fantastic thing, but art and content have different purposes. I think like content's about it often is about educating and inspiring and being relatable as well. Definitely, those are actually the three things I've learned about content, is that it should either educate, be relatable, or be inspirational.
Yes.
And I think those things are true in art as well, but there's something about the kind of functions where I think content is there to keep your attention for somebody else. So, for example, a company might fund content so that they can keep people's attention for longer and then advertise to them.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas art, I think it's outside of that system and it needs to be something about just being alive and just being human.
Yes.
But I use advertising myself. You have to work, and it's all, I'm not saying any of it's bad, but it's just they've got different purposes.
How do you represent spiritual themes in your work? How do you bring it in? What techniques do you use?
I think that's something that, again, is quite hard to explain potentially, but it's about getting into a headspace. I don't consciously compose in a particular style to be spiritual or anything like that. It's more about everything that I make. I want it to be really worth something, and it becomes spiritual if I become meditative and completely focused on it while I'm making it.
Yes.
Not focused on an end goal other than making it good, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So if I got distracted and thought, I want to make a hit song and I want to be famous or whatever, I'm probably like gonna make something that's not focused on the art itself and not focused on the things I want to think about. And ironically, actually, a lot of things that are famous and hit songs do exactly that. They take people somewhere new that they've not been before, rather than being designed to catch their attention or designed to do a certain thing.
What I'm getting from what you're saying is that you really want to tell a truth, and you want to get into that headspace where you're immersed in what that truth is and feel it very deeply inside you, and only then can you start to put that into some sort of sense using sound in time.
Wow, that's an amazing way of saying it, honestly. I think you phrased that way better than I could have done. That's beautiful. Honestly, you're such a wordsmith. I love it. That's really beautiful. Yeah, truth. Truth, that's a really important word. I think art is about truth, and sometimes it's about uncomfortable truth as well. There's a quote, and I can't remember who it's by, but I'm just going to think of it now. I think it's, art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed.
Wow.
I need to look up who that's by, but it stays with me a lot.
That's quite a God, there's a lot to unpack in there, isn't there?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm bringing it all today. Yeah.
What a phenomenal quote. But I think it's about that authenticity of feeling where it is what it is, unadorned, and just allowing that. I don't know. For me, when I write something, I have to go into that space, that feeling, that headspace, whatever it is, wherever my mind goes. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But it's sort of feeling that on a visceral level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your body has to be connected to it. That's the other thing about music is, and actually with all the art forms, is that if we just think about the brain, we lose sense of the fact that everything's connected and our body is an expression of so much. And music is such a physical thing, and it's connected to dance as well.
Yes.
And when they get too separated from one another, music and dance, they start to take on their own form and their own identity, but sometimes people lose the sense that they're music or dance.
Totally get that.
And I think voice as well. So obviously you work with your voice all of the time.
Yeah.
And you can manipulate and change your voice and do so many things with it. And I think music is connected to dance and the body, but it's also connected to voice. And I like to think of my work as always either being deeply rooted in the voice or deeply rooted in the body and dance.
Yes.
And that's why I tend to work with opera and dance, because they obviously are always connected to those things.
I wanted to find out about Anna's creative process. How we start to create music can be such a personal, indefinable thing. How ideas bubble up and make it into the world can be hard to put into words because, essentially, it's non-verbal. When you start a new piece, what's your process?
Okay, so every time I start a new piece, I completely forget what I did the last time.
Oh, I so know that feeling.
Yeah, do you feel that too? Like
There's a moment, right, when I usually begin it when I'm working on a big piece. It usually comes out of a study that I've done where I'm sort of experimenting with a sound palette and just different textures. So I've sort of got that, and then I open Sibelius and I'm about to really start some orchestration, and then I think, oh, what if I can't do it? What if I've just forgotten everything in the world and I can't do it anymore? What happens then?
Yeah. Oh, I think neither of us are alone with that. I think it's very common. It's like the blank page for a visual artist as well.
Totally. That's why I have to start with a study so it's not completely blank.
Yeah, you need a kind of challenge or
Yeah.
one of my teachers that I had always said it's good to decide what you're not going to do just as much as what you're going to do.
Yeah, totally.
So if you restrict yourself, it really helps to get going because then you've got something to kind of wrestle with. So sometimes I have to be honest, like a lot of the time I just sit down at the piano and I just play and I just see what happens, because that comes from the meditation and the visceral space and all those things we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But honestly, I love to collaborate because then I get my starting point from somebody else, because
Yes.
if I'm working with a choreographer, for example, then immediately I've got their movement and their form and their structure to inspire me, and their concepts as well. And I love having conversations with choreographers because they just approach everything in such an amazing way. So I love that, but I really love working with writers as well. And when I work with the voice, I'm almost always working with somebody else's text. I do my own texts as well because I write songs too. But when I'm writing sort of more contemporary classical music, I suppose, I like to work with a writer because then their text becomes the piece, and then that just sort of fuels whatever I do.
So it sounds like it's a really symbiotic process at the
Definitely.
beginning.
Yeah, definitely. I think I like to have a lot of freedom at the beginning as well. There's a composer called Thea Musgrave who's amazing. She's still going. She's in her 90s. She's absolutely fantastic. She's Scottish. And I didn't realise she was still alive, and I actually got to meet her. And it was like, you know, when you think somebody's died and you'll never meet them, and then you discover that.
Yeah,
Have
yeah,
you ever
yeah.
had that happen?
I have.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it? Like,
It blows your mind, actually.
I mean, she's still composing, but it was like a relic of the past as well, because she's someone that I'd read so much about and heard so much of her music, and suddenly she was in Manchester and she was coming to a
Wow.
concert of her own music, and I was like, oh my god, I could actually meet her, and I met her, and it was hilarious because I said, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll come back to where I was talking about it. I met her and I said, oh, I love your music, and she said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a composer as well. And she turned around and said to the whole concert hall, she was like, watch out, here comes another one. But the reason I mentioned her is she said, when you're making, it's really important to have that critic. You need that inner critic because
Yes.
it makes what you do good. But when you're creating, you need periods where you send the critic out of the room. You just say, okay, go out the room and shut the door, and I'm just going to make stuff now. And then you bring them back in when it's the right time.
Yes, I totally get that. For me, I have to start by just being a creator and then just sort of letting it all bleh,
Yeah.
come out somehow. And when I'm editing and when I'm sort of thinking about structure, I then have to sort of bring in this superego voice that sort of
Yes.
reins me in. But if that voice is there throughout the whole thing, it's just, I feel crippled.
Yeah, it's suffocating, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you've got that voice the whole time, because then how do you even make anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my process, I suppose, it comes a lot from freedom and collaboration and those kind of things at the beginning. But then as it goes on, like you said, superego or inner critic or whatever, I bring in the critical voice, and then that really pushes it to the next level. And I start to think more about form and structure. And the thing that I really come back to all the time is, what experience will the performers have playing this piece if I'm writing
Yes.
for other musicians? Sometimes I write for myself, but if I'm writing for other musicians, then it's like, what experience will they have making this into performance?
Because you've got to have your team on board, haven't you? It's got to be pleasant to play and not physically arduous.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's so important. Or if it is arduous, it has to be for the right reason, and you
Yes,
have to have people on
exactly,
board.
exactly.
You just need to take people with you, I think, and I think your audience, you need to take them with you as well, and you can take them anywhere once you've got them on board. That's the thing.
So at the very beginning, what comes first for you? Is it the music? Is it the idea? Or can it be either?
It can be either, but one of the reasons I like to start the piano is because the music sort of gives me something to work with. It's good to absorb lots of ideas and thoughts first, and then when you've had time for them to work their way into your subconscious, I don't know if you find this as well, then going to the piano and then letting the music sort of take over.
Totally that. I feel for me, I need an idea. I get an idea for a concept for a piece, and then it sort of needs to gestate.
Yeah.
And it's sort of happening while I'm doing the laundry and while I'm doing the cleaning and while I'm walking the dog and all this stuff. And it's happening on a low level. And then I sort of sense when it's ready to sort of be made into something.
Yeah.
But I need to do that sort of pre-preparation almost before I start.
Yeah, absolutely. Your subconscious does a lot of the work.
It really does.
Yeah, you've got to live life as well. If you just sit and stare at a wall, it's not going to flow in the same way. Just like if you're having a conversation with somebody, it tends to flow really well if you're having a walk.
So when you're starting then, do you tailor the piece to a specific performer or a choreographer or a company that you're working with? Do you have them in mind the whole time, almost as if you're writing it to optimize them?
Yeah, definitely. When I get commissioned or when I'm collaborating, particularly when I get commissioned, that person and that company and that context
Yes,
becomes so important. And that's like your work as well. I imagine that just like you change your voice for the context,
sure.
I will change my voice for the context. It's still me and it's still you. There's still a core thing there. And sometimes working out what that core thing is quite difficult, and knowing how much to change and how much to stay myself. But I think I do evolve a lot, and I'm a bit of a chameleon really artistically.
Yeah.
But then when I'm doing my own project that's just, it's not being commissioned and I'm not collaborating and it's just me on my own, which I've done a lot more in the pandemic, I have to be honest, because I've had more time to do that. That's really interesting because the kind of free creativity I had when I was a kid or a teenager is sort of coming back now as a result. And I think I lost it a bit when I was doing wall-to-wall commissions, because it was great to have wall-to-wall commissions and I was super grateful. But I did stagnate a little bit because everything was about the deadline.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how you felt being able to compose now in the pandemic and having some space. Have you found the voice that's you as well, you know?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think for me, it's given me a chance to sort of reflect on the world and on how I want my life to be, what I want to spend my time doing, and what I want to really invest in, how I want to grow.
Yeah.
So I think for me, just having this curious time, I mean, it's been so hard for so many people in so many dreadful ways.
Mm.
For me, I feel like it's just given me an opportunity to explore stuff, and I've let my mind go wherever it needs to go, really, and
Yeah.
quite unfettered. And out of that, I've started writing music, and for me, it's just been massively therapeutic.
That's beautiful to hear. Like, that's such a good thing to hear. It's been such a dualistic time, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Of
totally.
trauma and difficulty, but then out of that coming space as well to find something new.
I'm a big believer in post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
I do think that in the darkest moments, there are the greatest tiny kernels of gold that cause tremendous creative change. And I do think that I've seen it in my own life when things have been really challenging and really very dark, that actually those moments have propelled me forwards into a different version of myself, because, you're always constantly evolving and growing. And seizing those moments, no matter how exhausted or heartbroken you might feel, just seize those moments and mine them for opportunities, because they are there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lovely image again about those kernels of gold. Yeah, and we've also had wake up calls as well about what our priorities in life might need to
Yeah.
be.
What are our
And
values?
I love what you said about post-traumatic growth, because I think for me, music just literally is that, like, it's basically got me through life. Every time there's something that's too big or too difficult to
Yeah.
deal with in the everyday, music can kind of deal with it for me and through me somehow. Therapy is very, very important, but music and art are that way of having that growth. Like you say, it's that way of turning something horrible into something beautiful. taking like the silver lining to the extreme, I suppose.
Do you find composing music easy?
Yeah, so it really depends. Sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world. I've honestly sometimes sat down at my desk and I've just cried the whole way through trying to make something because it's so difficult,
Yeah.
because I've got this thing in my head and trying to bring it to reality is just literally like pulling teeth.
Yes.
I know not literally, but sometimes it feels like it is literally like the pain that I experience trying
It's
to.
birth pangs, Anna.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I sometimes say to people, I'm not going to have children, but my compositions of my children,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly difficult and draining and frustrating, and I can be quite all over the place when I'm doing it sometimes. But other times, it is the easiest thing in the world because I sit down and I just feel like this is what I'm born to do, this is what I can do, and this is what I love doing, and it just flows. And I think maybe that's down to whether it's something that I feel in the space to do or whether it's something that I feel I have to do.
Yeah.
And they can be very different things. Sometimes a commission can feel really easy because I'm in the right space to do it. And sometimes something that I thought I wanted to do for myself feels impossible because I'm maybe pushing myself to do it and I don't feel I know how to. But the other times it's the other way around, and a commission feels very, very difficult because it's something that's slightly out of my comfort zone and I've taken it on as a challenge, but I feel quite drained and overwhelmed and the deadline's approaching, and so it does depend. I know it probably does for you as well.
Yes, totally. If I'm stuck with something, then I think, right, it's not ready to come out yet. It needs to cook a bit more. So I don't abandon it. I just put it to one side and I do something completely different. And I think of a different kind of ensemble that I can write for. And I sort of get myself into that sort of headspace and then write that and then return to the first idea. And then it sort of reveals itself into what it should be.
Yeah.
I think often for me, I start to write something and I've had times when I've wrestled with the music because I'm trying to put it in a place where it doesn't want to go. And that can be really painful. And I just have to think, no. I just need to go where this music is telling me it needs to be and follow this breadcrumb trail somewhere and just see what comes out. And that's been really useful. Relinquishing that control, actually,
Yeah.
and just letting the music show itself.
And yet it can be difficult if you feel that somebody else is asking you to do things a certain way.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I collaborate, the other person's got a very, very strong idea of what they think should happen. And sometimes I've been too passive with that process and I've
Yes.
sort of let the other person's voice become.
That's a delicate balance, isn't it, in a collaboration? Really delicate.
It really is. And I think sometimes it comes down to power dynamics as well, who's
You
got the
read my
money,
mind.
who's paying for it, and if it's an equal collaboration and you're both being paid by somebody else, then it's easier to kind of jostle a bit and say, no, I think it should do this. But I always try and bring that to every collaboration, even if it is a top-down commission, because I think that's part of my gift that I'm offering as the composer, is to say, I'm going to challenge you as well. I'm not just going to do what you say because I'll bring something different.
Anna doesn't limit her music making to the classical genre. She has an alter ego. I wanted to find out how she created this alternative persona and how this kind of music adds to her creative life. You have an electronic pop alter ego, Norisette, and this music is beautiful, it's delicate, it's honest, and your vocals somehow evoke another world, another kind of consciousness. So what inspired you to create this type of music?
Thank you for listening to Norisette's music.
Love it.
It's something that I've been working on over the past, it's actually been a year now. So I suppose what happened is my post-traumatic growth, or during the pandemic even, there was all this kind of grief and loss and confusion that became this alter ego because I couldn't keep doing what I'd done before.
Yeah.
I'd built up myself and my friends and my world and my job, and everything seemed to be kind of ticking over. It all gets taken away. And rather than kind of try and wrestle to have it back, because I knew I couldn't, I knew that was out of my control, I thought, well, let's just go where I'm going. And this other alter ego was born, Norisette. I live in Heaton Norris, so there's a nice route for my partner came up with the name because I was struggling to come up with a name. And I looked up the word Norris and it used to mean northerner.
Yeah.
And although my voice shapeshifts a lot. I was born in Newcastle and I live in Manchester, and I feel the North is very much my home. So I liked that connection. So she, my alter ego, her voice, I suppose, is a voice that's been inside me my whole life, but I haven't been too afraid to bring out. I suppose I've got a bit braver this year because I've realised like how much is at stake in life, and we only get one chance to live our life. YOLO. It's like
Did it take a lot of courage then to create this alter ego?
Yeah, I think I did worry a lot that people might think I was a bit crazy or stupid, because when you've built up one thing and you're good at something, and you might have found this with starting composing actually, when you've built up a career and you feel quite accomplished and settled in your career in a lot of ways, although we all have, anxiety and imposter syndrome at different times. When you feel quite comfortable and established, to start something new and realise you might be quite bad at it and people might think it's scary, isn't it?
Oh, I'm terrified. Every damn day, Anna. Terrified.
Yeah, and I think like you have to embrace the fear because it takes you somewhere new. But I think comfort zones are important as well because they tell us something. They tell us where we want to sit naturally, and sometimes you need to go.
Totally that.
Yeah.
It's that push and pull for me of understanding what my comfort zone is and why I need it, and then where its limits are, and how I can safely push it without giving myself a breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sort of really challenging myself to do something that I might not find quite comfortable, but I can learn to be comfortable with it somehow.
Exactly, yeah. I think I have that push and pull as well. And quite often I go too far because I'm about to turn 28, and I think in your 20s you kind of feel like this is the time that you're supposed to try everything.
Yeah.
And obviously the pandemic's limited the kind of spectrum of things you can do. So I suppose I've gone into what I can do, and what I can do in these four walls is electronic music, and it's been a dream of mine since I was really small, but I never kind of acknowledged it because I felt ashamed that I wanted to do something that felt frivolous or not like a real job, or I don't know. And then ironically I made music into my job anyway, but in a more sort of respectable way, I suppose I found this respectable professional way of being a musician. And then I realized I was losing that raw kind of spark that I had that comes from the folk music and the jazz and listening to Simon and Garfunkel records and everything when I was little.
Totally get that. Just sort of letting go of those expectations and assumptions that other people make of you that you then somehow take on board as your own identity. And it actually isn't. It's just somebody else's perception. And they think, hang on, that's not really me. No, that isn't me. And then finding that authentic, childlike, true self is such an important part of the creative process, I think.
Yes, you've nailed it there, honestly. And it's lovely to hear that we've experienced so many crossovers and similar things, because even though our lives might look different in other ways, there is this kernel that I think every creative person has in common. The struggle to make a living and be taken seriously and get your stuff out there, but then to stay in touch with the spark and actually take the risks and be authentic.
All the show notes for this episode are available in the description, and there's a bunch more stuff at beforethebaropens.com. Before the Bar Opens is created by me, Emma Clarke, and is produced by Rick Watson. I composed the theme music. If you'd like to leave us a voice message and maybe be featured in a future episode of Before the Bar Opens, check out the show notes and follow the Leave Us a Voice Message link. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, hopefully a lovely one, and tell your friends. Another episode will be along very soon, so don't miss it. Thanks for listening.